Hi, and welcome. You're listening to the X22 Report. My name is Dave, and this is episode 891B, and today's date is February 11th, 2016, and the title of the episode is U.S. Now Looking to the Coalition to Fund Their Proxy Wars. Let's get into the economic collapse, political, and geopolitical news. Now, we have been seeing governments, the World Health Organization, the CDC, pushing the propaganda that the Zika virus causes microcephaly. And they're continually trying to make the case that this is what happens. We know that the President of the United States put aside or is asking for $1.8 billion to fight this Zika virus, to help pharmaceutical companies create vaccines. But this whole thing is a complete hoax because there's no correlation to microcephaly. So a group of doctors looked into this in South America, and they wanted to see, well, is it the Zika virus? Is it the mosquitoes that are causing this problem? And they looked into it, and they found that in this area where this started, the Brazilian people, the low-income Brazilian people in this area, they were exposed to chemical larvicide. They were basically exposed to mass fumigation in that area. And the Zika virus has nothing to do with this, because the brain deformations of the children are correlating to this chemical they used in mass fumigations. Now, the doctors are from Red University of Environmental and Health, and when they looked into it, they see that the chemical pyroproxifen, which is a poison, was used. Now, this chemical is manufactured by Sumitomo Chemical, a corporation known to be a strategic partner of Monsanto. And the doctors say it's a subsidiary of Monsanto. And what this chemical does, it is a growth inhibitor of mosquito larvae, which alters the development process from larvae to pupa to adult, thus generating malformations in developing mosquitoes and killing or disabling them. And of course, as they spray the area, it gets into the drinking water, it gets all over the place, and this correlates now to this mass fumigation. That's why it was in this isolated area. Now, of course, they're using this as a cover story that the Zika virus is causing this. Zika is spreading all over the place. And we see at this point, this is being done to hide all of this. And again, this is what governments do. They use propaganda. They lie to the people to convince you of something that's really not happening. Now, out in Oregon, we see that the standoff in the Wildlife Center has come to an end. The 3 of the 4 Oregon protesters have surrendered, and it looks like there is one that is holding out right now. Most likely, he will also surrender, and this will come to an end. Now, what's very interesting is Cliven Bundy was flying over there, and when he got off the plane, he was arrested immediately on conspiracy charges, which is absolutely ridiculous. Hasn't even done anything, and they just arrest him. But we see why they're doing this. They're using this whole incident to justify why they need a task force to go after anti-government extremists. And the Oregon ranchers, they are the poster child for this new agenda. And they're going to be pushing this very, very hard, because they realize this is not going to be the only incident, because as people become more aware of what's going on, people get upset. People say, I don't like what's going on in this country. We're going to see more of this, and they realize this, and they know. And they're going to try to squash it before it occurs. And we see in Twitter right now, and I mentioned this before, that they're creating this ministry of truth, which is kind of right out of George Orwell's novel 1984, where they'll be monitoring Twitter posts. And what I think, what's very interesting about this, their actual council is called Trust and Safety Council, and they're forming this to keep you safe as you blog. I mean, I don't need to be kept safe. If I want to say something, I'll say something. If I want to talk about something, I'll talk about it. I don't need a group to tell me if it's okay or not okay. And what they're doing is they have a group of like 40 organizations and experts from 13 regions joining this member council, and they're putting them all together. And this council is kind of Orwellian because when you look at this roster of people or groups in this council, they're overwhelmingly biased in favor of speech suppression. The council includes more than 40 organizations that will be tasked with helping Twitter, and they're going to strike the right balance between fighting abuse and speaking truth to power. Well, if the goal was really to find some middle ground between total free speech and safeguards against harassment, you would think Twitter would have some diversity of opinion. You would think they would bring in other voices or other groups into the mix. None of these groups in this council are free speech organizations, which I find very odd. This shows you that they're going to try to lock it down. They're going to take things away that they don't want people to see or hear of what's going on. And we're seeing a lot of this in social media. And I think when the FBI was out there scaring the world that, ISIS is taking to Twitter, ISIS is taking to Facebook, they were pushing that agenda, not to scare everyone, that was part of it, but also to have each one of these social media companies create some type of group that will monitor what people are saying and have them take it down when necessary. And the government was instrumental in helping them along and creating these type of groups. We see it in Facebook. We see it in YouTube. And they're doing this to everything, just like France. That is the poster child of taking away your rights and basically becoming a police state. So out in North Korea, we see the U.S. Senate, they passed new legislation 96-0, imposing additional sanctions on North Korea. Basically, the Senate bill will target North Korea's ability to access money. The legislation also authorizes $50 million for radio broadcasts into the isolated country. Propaganda, basically, to try to convince the people to overthrow their government. Now, we know the U.S. came out and said, North Korea just launched, a rocket. This is absolutely ridiculous. We need sanctions. We need missiles in South Korea. And after criticizing North Korea for launching the satellite into space, which they told the UN, which kind of everyone knew they were going to do this, the United States launched their own satellite into orbit yesterday. But the payload is classified. So it's kind of strange that the U.S. is out there criticizing one country for launching a satellite into space, and they do it a couple days later. And again, countries are allowed to launch satellites into space. They're allowed to move military assets all inside their country wherever they want. Doesn't mean they're going to use it. Sometimes they have drills in their countries. Sometimes they just have to move things. But the U.S. uses this for propaganda purposes. Out in Ukraine, the Donetsk envoy is saying Kiev is lying about meeting the Minsk commitments. He says they're not telling the truth. They haven't met any of the commitments on the settlement in Ukraine under the Minsk agreements. We've signed this a year ago, and since this time, nothing's been done, which I agree with. Nothing has been done. You know why? Because the U.S. doesn't want the Minsk II ceasefire agreement fulfilled. That's it. They're telling Kiev, absolutely not. That's what's going on. Now we see the shelling in Kiev is continuing, and it looks like they are moving their military assets around, firing on Donbass, and they're trying to convince the world that we need peacekeepers inside of this area. They had a bus bomb, they're shelling, they closed the border, the checkpoints in Lugansk and Donetsk, and they're continually pushing the agenda and harassing the OSCE to say, see, we have all these problems in this area, we need peacekeepers. And under the Minsk II ceasefire agreement, there's no section in there that has anything to do with peacekeepers, but they're trying to say this whole area needs it because look what's happening. And you can see what they're trying to do. They're trying to push an offensive, and if they can't get the peacekeepers in there, they're going for the offensive. Now, out in Crimea, we see that Russia is bringing in military assets for a military exercise. They're bringing in more troops, anti-aircraft defense systems in Crimea, and they're reinforcing everything. So this should tell us that something is definitely going on in Ukraine, and it looks like Russia is preparing and fortifying Crimea, because we know that the United States, the central bankers, have not gotten what they paid for, and they're going to go after the southeastern section and Crimea. And Russia knows this. Now, Russia, they've flown in 2 cargo aircrafts, which delivered about 50 tons of humanitarian aid to a Syrian airbase to help the Syrian people. We see that Lavrov and Kerry, they're meeting on the sidelines of Munich with their security conference, talk about Syria and what Russia is proposing to basically end the civil war in Syria, which is really not a civil war because the United States funded the entire thing. They want Assad overthrown. They pay for the terrorists. And Russia is trying to calm the situation down and basically stop all the wars in this area. Is it going to work? Most likely not. Now, NATO, very interestingly, they're going to basically bring in ships in the Aegean Sea, and they're saying without delay, they're going to support German, Greek, Turkish requests for a maritime mission to help monitor Turkey's Aegean Sea coast for migrant smugglers. So is this really what they're doing? Most likely not. It looks like they're positioning some ships in this area. NATO is going to intensify reconnaissance on the Turkish-Syria border. And this is coming from NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg. NATO is also considering troop deployment in this area. Now, of course, they're saying, well, we're very nervous about the Islamic State, and we might need to bring troops into this area. Now, all of this is leading up to a war in this area. I mean, we see too many coincidental things occurring at the same time. We have the amphibious ships coming from the U.S., which are the same ones that were used back in 2013 of August. And those are going to the same exact area. We see the British fleet. They're bringing in their warships into the Black Sea, into that area, which is the opposite side of Turkey, which basically they can just sail those ships right into the Mediterranean and be in Syria in no time. We see that troops are being built up and they're being trained in Jordan. Once again, we have another drill going on. All these things are happening at the same time. Now, NATO is out there helping with the refugee problem and bringing in ships. Now, the U.S., as Aleppo is falling and the Syrian government and Russia is taking it back, they decided they were going to bomb the city of Aleppo with A-10s. Now, what they bombed, we don't know. They're saying that they bombed oil fields and they're hitting the Islamic State. And then they blamed the bombings on hospitals and killing civilians on Russia. And Russia said, whoa, just a minute. We didn't even have planes in the air at this time. So it's completely impossible for us to have bombed 2 hospitals. So basically what happened is the United States bombed civilians, bombed hospitals, most likely bombed the infrastructure, going after the Syrian army and civilians. And they're trying to blame this on Russia because they don't want Aleppo to fall. They don't want Syria to take full control of it. Neither does Turkey. They don't want this to occur. And we see already that the U.S., Saudi Arabia, Turkey, NATO, the coalition forces, they are getting ready and prepared for something big. U.S. is pushing propaganda that the Russian campaign right now in Syria is helping the Islamic State. No. Basically, they're losing their proxy army. Russia has already destroyed the oil convoy. The revenue is trickling in right now. A lot of the Islamic State has been airlifted out of Syria. And what's very interesting is Ashton Carter is going around to all the Persian Gulf states asking for more. We need funds to fight the Islamic State. Now, I see Australia saying, oh, we're going to give funds to fight the Islamic State and help out in this situation. What I think is happening right now is they're asking all of these countries to make up the difference for the lost revenue of the oil convoys. Because remember, Russia destroyed the oil convoys, exposed Turkey in running this operation. And remember that the U.S. Treasury Department, they had exact numbers of how much the Islamic State was making. They just couldn't find the trucks, but they knew exactly how much they were making. It is the wealthiest terrorist group in the world. And now, all of a sudden, the revenue has trickled down to nothing. And I think to keep this operational, they need revenue coming in. And right now, they're asking the countries to assist for donations. We need donations for our terrorist group. Can you please help out? This is what it looks like. Saudi Arabia right now, they're making the final decision to send troops into Syria. Now, is Saudi Arabia really going to make that much of a difference? Well, they have a lot of soldiers on the ready. They're paid mercenaries. They're not even Saudi Arabian troops. A lot of them are outside mercenaries. And we can see why they're doing this at this point. They're building up a force. Erdogan is threatening Europe right now, saying we are going to unleash millions upon millions of refugees upon you once again. We want you to pay, and we want you to join us because we need a safe zone. This is what he's saying. We need a new or a brand new type of no-fly safe zone where these refugees can stay. And they can't stay in Turkey. They have to stay in Syria. So they're trying to push the idea that we're going to have 600,000 refugees coming from Syria. They don't know where they got this number. They just made it up out of thin air, coming into Turkey. And Turkey's going to unleash millions of these refugees that they already have in their country, plus the 600,000 on Europe, unless they say, okay, we're going to help you establish this safe zone. So what we're seeing right now is the U.S., they have a base in Syria. They're extending it to bring in the C-130 transport planes. We see they're building the border up with Syria, adding security, because having this security with the safe zone bordering Turkey, this is exactly what they want. They're pushing their agenda once again. And we're going to have to watch this very carefully because all of these pieces are now coming into place. The U.S., they are backed up against the wall. They have no other place to go at this time because if the Islamic State is completely defeated in Syria, what is the reason for the United States to be in Syria? There is no reason. They would have to leave. Well, they don't want to leave just yet. So they need to create something at this point. Yes, they're talking to Russia, or actually Russia is talking to the United States, saying we have a plan to stop all this. But does the United States really want this to stop? Because they want Assad overthrown. Because eventually they have to go into Iran, because Iran is not going to be using the dollar on the reserve, on their oil, on their natural resources. So the prize is Iran. To get to Iran, they need Syria. And we can see at this point, they will never give this up. If they do, the system just comes down and crashes. And they know this. So they can't turn back. They only can go forward. And this is why they're pushing so hard. This is why they're putting all the pieces together. They're coming up with a new plan. And we're going to have to wait to see what this new plan is. Listen, everyone, thanks a lot for listening. Be well, be safe, and especially be prepared. Thanks a lot.